Curiosity made me continue my exploration, though there was no real reason to do so. I left the wall, and I decided to try and walk across the cell. At first I moved very cautiously, because the floor was slimy and seemed dangerous. I moved in as direct a line as possible, and had advanced 10 or 12 paces when the bottom of my robe got caught between my legs. I fell. I quickly realized that something was very wrong. My chin rested on the floor of the prison, but my lips and forehead touched nothing. My forehead was cold and damp, and I could smell decayed fungus. I put out my hand. To my horror, I found that I had fallen at the very edge of a pit. I had no idea how big it was, so I broke off a small fragment of stone and dropped it into the abyss in order to find out. I listened for many long seconds, and finally there came the sound of stone hitting water, followed by echoes. At the same time, there was a noise like a door closing and a sudden faint glimmer of light over my head. I saw clearly the death they had planned for me, which I had escaped for now. One more step before my fall would have been my end. Strangely, the death I had avoided was the kind I always believed happened only in stories, something invented to make people fear the Inquisition. For the Inquisition's victims, there was the choice of death by the worst physical agonies, or death with terrible mental horror. I had been given the second choice. My nerves were torn to pieces because of my suffering, and I trembled at the sound of my own voice. I had become the perfect subject for the tortures they wanted to inflict on me. I was shaking. I groped my way back to the wall. I preferred to die there rather than risk the terror of the pit. I imagined there were more pits in the dungeon. If I had been in a different state of mind, I might have had the courage to end my misery immediately and throw myself into the abyss. But I was now the worst of cowards. A whirlwind of thoughts kept me awake for what seemed a long time. I managed to fall into a troubled sleep, and once again, there was a loaf of bread and a jug of water next to me when I awoke. I was so thirsty that I drank the entire jug immediately. The water must have had something in it, because from the moment I finished drinking, I could not keep my eyes open. I slept some more. A sleep like death. I do not know how long I slept, but when I opened my eyes, I could see the objects around me for the first time. The light was strange and eerie, but at least now I could see the size and shape of my prison. I had completely miscalculated the size of the room. The entire circumference of the walls was no more than 75 feet. This error disturbed me, and I tried to discover the reason for it. Of course, in my first attempt at exploring the dungeon, I counted 52 paces, then I fell. I must have landed on top of the fragment of cloth. When I woke up, I continued walking. This meant I had completed 2 circuits of the walls, but thought I had walked around only once. I had also been wrong about the shape of the dungeon. I found many angles when I felt my way around the walls, but the effect of total darkness plays games with the mind, so that I exaggerated these angles. They were no more than small irregularities in the walls. In fact, the prison room was square. Also, what I had thought was stone was iron. Iron in enormous plates, which gave the impression of bricks in the wall. The entire surface of this metallic cell was covered in figures of wild and angry demons, skeletal forms, and other even more terrifying images. The floor was stone. In the center was the circular pit, the only pit in the dungeon. I saw all this with great difficulty, because my situation had changed while I was sleeping. I now lay on my back on a low wooden bed. I was securely tied by a long leather strap. I could move only my head and left arm from the elbow down. At least I could feed myself from a plate on the floor, but the water jug was gone, and I was very thirsty again. This was my torturer's objective, because the food on the plate was heavily spiced. I looked up at the ceiling 30 or 40 feet above me. Like the walls, it was metal. A figure painted on one of the panels caught my eye. It was the figure of time, holding what looked like a huge pendulum, like those we see on antique clocks. Something strange about the figure drew my attention. As I looked, I thought I saw the pendulum move a little. Seconds later, it moved again, very slowly. I watched for some minutes, half in fear and half in wonder. Then, tired by the effort, I looked around my cell. A slight noise suddenly attracted my attention, and I saw several enormous rats run across the floor. The rats came from the pit. While I watched, they crawled out. 1, 2. Soon there were too many to count. They all came toward me, tempted by the smell of meat on the plate beside me. It took all my strength to keep them away.